Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I love going this online thing where we get to be everywhere and anywhere all at once, right? Um, over the last, I don't know, 5 or more years, I've been able to do this in what feels like hundreds of different locations across the country, and it's been pretty cool. Pretty cool to see the different communities coming together, and even just that meditation. Isn't it awesome to have a group of people who come together on a weekly basis where you can just show up and be in that space together? So it is nice to be here with you, and I am also excited to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is oneness and wholeness. Part of my, I think, mission as a minister within CSL has been to explore language. And actually, that might be part of my mission throughout most of my life. I have always been fascinated by language and communication. I can remember one time as a kid, my dad worked from home. He worked out of the house, which was really cool most of the time. Uh, but I remember this specific time. I have no idea how this came up, but I remember sitting in my dad's office one morning, and he had pulled out one of these, those big flip charts, and wrote on it with a marker and wrote out the sentence, "I didn't say that." And he said, "All right, now, however you emphasize this sentence, it means something completely different." And I'm like, What are you talking about?" I'm like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, right? And he goes, "Yeah, try it." He goes, emphasize the word "I." And I'm like, "Okay, I didn't say that." And he's like, "Okay, now put it on the next word." "I didn't say that." "Okay, now the next word." "I didn't say that." "Now the next one." "I didn't say that." And all that, just, oh my gosh, like how mind-blowing that same exact word, slightly different emphasis, and it can mean something completely different. And that just stuck with me. I think about that very often. And I think that one of the reasons that stuck with me, and one of the reasons that language has become so important to me, is that I think it's really easy as people to feel misunderstood. I think that's a very common experience, and it certainly was one that was familiar to me, especially as a kid, feeling misunderstood, misheard, and like, "I didn't say that," which is maybe why he pulled that sentence. Um, and just always wondering, like, how did that other person hear me say this when what I thought I clearly said was XYZ. And so language has been really, really important to me. And isn't it interesting how the things that are often coping mechanisms as children can very easily become like our greatest strengths as adults? That when we do that inner work and we work through whatever the need was that wasn't being met, or at least begin to work through whatever the need was that wasn't being met, that skill, that coping mechanism, can become like our greatest attribute, right? So the foundation, the skeleton of that learning as a child became so powerful when it kind of becomes flipped around and looking at it through another perspective. Now, all of a sudden, well, maybe not all of a sudden, through the last 10 plus years or more, um, that idea, that concept has become really powerful, because in my journey through Centers for Spiritual Living, very early on, when I found a CSL nearby and started attending, I almost immediately got involved volunteering at the national level, and attending conference and being on teams and committees for the organization. And now I'm on staff at home office, and have spoken at several conventions in Asilomar, and presented all kinds of workshops and things. And as I said, had the opportunity to speak at many of our communities all over the place. And it is fascinating to me to listen to our use of language. And what I have found is that the way we learn language within our communities, because we have like a jargon, a language that is specific to this field, which is really common to any field, really. Like this field has this language, biology has the language of biology, and chemistry has the language of chemistry, and physics has the language of physics. Well, we have the language of metaphysics, specifically the language of science of mind. And what I have pieced together over the years is, as people, the way we learn language. No one is following us around with a child. As a child, no one's following us around with a dictionary of sorts or a glossary saying, "Oh, that's a clock. A clock is da 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 da." Right? We learn through the context. The clock exists. We see other people referring to it as a clock enough times. Eventually, we go, "Oh, that's a clock. That's a car. That's a door. That's mom. That's dad." So we learn through the context, we learn through the relationship, and yet we're never really given the definition of what those things are. And when we do need to define something, it's usually much later into our teens, into adulthood, when we actually, if we take the time to actually define what these things really are. Like, what is a clock? Could you define a clock? I mean, probably, but is that really the definition of a clock? Is that really the definition of a car? I don't know. How do you define a car? Could be so many things. Uh, and it's just fascinating to me because we all come with our own history and story and interpretation and our own context for what all of these things mean. And so, out of the thousands of words that we know as adults, how many of them did we really learn through the context of a glossary and a formal definition? And how many of them did we learn through the experience of just being, just living, just through conversation? And in Science of Mind and in Centers for Spiritual Living, I think very often that's the same thing. We show up in a class or on a Sunday morning or to a workshop or meditation or whatever the event is, and we start hearing this language that at the time is probably fairly unfamiliar, but everyone else seems to know it. So we're like, huh, okay. And so maybe we don't know what it means at first, but you hear a practitioner get up on Sunday morning and they're using all this beautiful language that clearly everyone else seems to understand. And we're sitting there like, that sounds great. I don't know what half of it means, but it makes me feel really good. It makes me feel really good. I like that. And eventually we hang around long enough, we start to pick up what those words mean through the context, the same way we learned as a kid what all these things, who mom was, who dad was, whoever, whatever the relationships were, who aunts and uncles and cars and trucks and doors and clocks and all the things. We start to learn what oneness, what wholeness, what consciousness means through the context of the experience that we're having, right? I learned through the context of the experience that I had how I interpreted those words. And so the funniest or most interesting, not funny, haha, but funny, hmm, uh, about language is that we each really do have our own definition because of our own experience. And so, whatever word we're using really is the closest assumption that we can make to understanding each other. So, we're never really sure. We can never really be sure what someone else means when they're using a word. And yet our brain hears that word, recalls this file, and goes, "Oh, that they mean this." And it's like, "Oh, fascinating." And so for me as a kid, I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea that that was going on, and it drove me crazy because it's like I didn't say that. I said that, right? And here as an adult, it's like I've spent years watching, going, "Oh, wow. Wow, that is amazing." Watching this happen over and over and over in all over the place, not just our communities, but in the world. Watching that happen in politics, watching that happen in the news, watching that happen on social media in comments. I love just going and reading through, these posts that are clearly poking at other people and seeing the comments and the discourse back and forth and going, Interesting. I wonder what they meant by that. And I wonder how this person took it, because it seems like we made this conclusion. I don't know that they said that. I don't know that they said anything like that, and we jumped to here. Or somebody said one thing and somebody else had clearly triggered something that had, from what I read, had nothing to do with what they posted, and they went somewhere totally different, because we have this the experience of what we mean by those words. And so when we talk about oneness, my experience with the word oneness is one where it feels really good to talk about oneness. And when we talk about oneness within our communities, people start lighting up. We start getting these smiles. It's a very warm feeling. And what I have found is very often, I think because culturally we have created, not we here, this started a long time ago, a long, long time ago. We have created a scenario where we're not supposed to we're not supposed to air our dirty laundry. We're not supposed to talk about the things that might make someone else uncomfortable. How are you? I'm great. I'm fine. Oh, life is. And yes, that is probably true for most of us most of the time. I can almost guarantee is not true 100% of the time for all of us. And yet, I know for me, hey, how are you? Good to see you. How you doing? Good. How are you? We just have this automatic boom, boom, boom response. And so culturally, there has been this development over decades of a facade of what is publicly acceptable, how we are supposed to show up, how we're supposed to appear. Because if you make me feel something, I don't know how to react to how you make me feel. Don't you dare make me feel something that makes me feel uncomfortable, is the message that we get. And oddly enough, within our communities, because we're the place where you can show up as you are, right? Except the between the lines message is, yes, you can show up as you are, as long as, right? Because we have this message where oneness, perfection, you are whole, perfect, and complete. And so if we feel like we're anything but that, and we show up, it can really quickly feel like, well, if I'm not whole, perfect, and complete, clearly I'm not doing it right. I'm doing something wrong. And we incidentally convey this message to people all the time, because oneness has turned into very often the perfection, the ideal version of the reality that we want. And so oneness is all of the things I like, but I'm going to put these over here. We're not supposed to think about the negative. We're not supposed to experience the negative. We're not supposed to have the negative. So that kind of gets brushed aside, and oneness is up here and everything else is over here to the side. Well, unfortunately, that's not really oneness. If we have this stuff over here and then everything else, that's not really oneness. And I think this shows up way more often than we want. I remember a time where um, I had a cold one Sunday morning, and I was like really bad cold, and was playing it in the band at the center I was a part of at the time. And I really struggled with needing to show I'm supposed to be there, and I'm not supposed to have a cold. We don't do, there was a saying in our community, we don't do germs. We don't do germs. Well, okay. Except collectively, our collective unconscious says right now, at least we do, because we get sick. We do germs. We do. I might not want to let them into my experience, and certainly I can influence my experience and my thoughts and my beliefs, that I experience them way less than most people. But there are times where I'm not 100% focused on that idea, and I was around somebody who had a cold, or however it happens, and got a cold. And yet I struggled so much with, can I show up on this day to this place where I'm not, I think I was a practitioner at the time. I'm a practitioner. I'm not supposed to do germs. And here I am showing up. And I remember years later, it came up in conversation with a couple of other people, and they shared the same experience, that they're like, oh, there were times I wouldn't come. There are times on Sundays I would not show up because I, I, I was, I was doing it wrong. If you got a cold, if you got a whatever, you're doing it wrong. This is the message, because that facade says everything is supposed to be perfect. Oneness is all that is positive and light and perfect, and it is, and it is also the uncomfortable, the germs, the the other side of the political spectrum, the right. It is all of the things, and that can be not a really pleasant thought to think about a lot of the times. That what else could there be if we really believe in oneness? What else could there possibly be other than part of oneness? And so all the things that I can very easily want to sweep under the rug or push aside have to be part of the oneness, right? And that really is one of the things that, I mean, obviously Science of Mind stresses very much the idea of oneness, but one of the things that distinguishes us from a lot of other teachings is the idea that, the saying, oh, we are human beings having the spiritual experience. And the spiritual experience, the other half of that sentence is, the spiritual experience is the human experience. It is the animal experience, the bug experience. It is the rock experience. What else could it be? What else could there be? All of it has to be the spiritual experience. All of the spiritual experience has to be the experience of form. And that is it, right? Like, this life, all of this has to be spiritually real. This computer in front of me, right? My phone, the rocks outside, all of that is spirit, right? For there to be oneness, all of it has to be that thing. And so before the Big Bang, let's call it light. There was this like field of light, expansive light in every direction, and there was nothing else. And it was probably beautiful and also blinding and just so intense. And yet there was nothing for that light to reflect off of, to bounce off of, to create shadows, for it to even know itself. There was no contouring whatsoever. And how boring that might be. So I pretend that it said, this is boring. What else? There's got to be more to this. And so one created two. The Big Bang exploded, and there were these two gaseous substances that literally contained every single molecule that will ever exist in this physical realm. So everything that we can possibly know is made up of molecules that are like close to 14 billion years old. So the molecules that have made up you, that make up you, are literally it's the same matter that made up the rocks that created the planets, right? These gaseous substances banged around and mushed around for so long that they created physical matter, physical material, form, rocks, moons, planets, right? And these things clashed around out there, and that's how our moon was created. That's how the earth was created. That's how all the rocks and all the water, right? All the minerals, the materials that are the earth, before there were people, it was just, before there were animals, before there was conscious beings here, there was rocks and water with the consciousness of rocks, the consciousness of water, right? Like that, those are also spiritual, let's call them beings for lack of a better word, spiritual beings, right? This rock has rock consciousness. And we were that rock. Literally, we were that rock. Because all of the matter has always existed. It couldn't be nothing. The matter that was those rocks became the matter that is us. We are, I can't even fathom how does that transition happen, where rocks break up into sand, into dust, into this material that morphs and changes and evolves. And at some point, there's single-celled organisms that become multiple-celled organisms that eventually start walking on land and eventually become human. We literally, you were made of, you were rock. You you were just, your consciousness, your cells, your molecules were just hanging around for thousands of years, millions of years, as rocks, as water, as trees, as plants. Who knows what else we were, right? The material that makes us up was anything, everything. And so when we talk about oneness, it's kind of a different picture, different scope on oneness. You know, we don't live on planet Earth, we live in planet Earth, right? Planet Earth doesn't stop at the ground. We don't have this hierarchy of like the dominion of the land that we live in on. We are the land we live on. We are the land we live in. Earth doesn't stop here. It extends how many tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere. If you were to zoom out, where does the atmosphere of the Earth actually stop? And we are well within that atmosphere. We literally live in Earth. We are a part of the whole, the ecosystem that we live on. And so when we talk about oneness, when we think about oneness through the scope of wholeness, it becomes a whole other conversation. Not only from the perspective of we are made up of the whole, like all of the things that have ever come into being had to be for us to be here, that we are made up of all those things, but then also our human experience through emotions and thoughts and feelings and relationships. That what is oneness without wholeness? What is our sense of oneness without incorporating all of the things we like, all of the things we don't like, and everything in between, all that makes us comfortable, all that makes us uncomfortable, is part of oneness, is part of the whole thing. We don't really have oneness without wholeness. We don't have the one without all of the things, all of the pieces that make up the whole, that make up all there is. We don't have the universe without all of the molecules that make up each one of us. We don't have the universe without you as you right now, right? I don't have my experience now without all of the experiences of my past. I don't have my experience right now without recognizing all of the whole experience that I'm having right now. And so wholeness has become one of my new favorite words. Wholeness is where it's at. And yet it also means being willing to be uncomfortable at times. Wholeness means being willing to pause and be curious about things that I thought I knew something about before. Oh, I know why that person says that. I know why that person believes that. I don't know. I've made up a story about why I think I heard what I thought they said. I made up a story about why I think I understand what they meant. I don't really have any idea. And that doesn't detract in any way from the experience that I am having. I am hearing them and seeing them for whatever collective experience our deeper selves are looking to have. I need to misinterpret what they're saying so that I learn and grow and change. And same. They need to hear and misunderstand or totally understand what I'm saying for their learning. And collectively, we have this closer coming together, this closer relationship because of the willingness to dive into wholeness. And so I think I could probably continue on this conversation for hours, so I will not. Um, Wholeness is really the key to our growth. Wholeness is when we look out at the world right now, when we look out at the United States right now, wholeness is what is looking to emerge. So when we talk about oneness, the evolution of awareness, human awareness, is oneness as wholeness. what is looking to happen, the conversations that are looking to be had, is wholeness, is the curiosity, the vulnerability, the willingness to hear other people, how they're wanting to be heard. It's the vulnerability and the willingness to be misunderstood, to say what we're looking to say and be misunderstood, so that we can create a space to come closer together and dive into what that misunderstanding is, to dive into what it is I think I heard, what it is I think I meant, what it is I think I thought you meant, what I think I heard you say. And so, what is oneness without wholeness if everything has always been, always will be, including all of our experience? So let's just take this into a moment of prayer for a second. Knowing that all that there is has always been, knowing that there really is only one, that all of life is existent in and as and of itself, that the thing, the light that existed before there was anything is the same thing that exists now as form, that all of life is the human and the spiritual and the rock, the animal, the water, whatever it is all that oneness. And so I recognize that for each of us there is a place within that is willing to be curious, to seek wholeness, to shift and make room for growth and new beliefs and new understandings, that is willing to be vulnerable and maybe even uncomfortable for the growth and the expansion of human awareness, that our awareness of consciousness is ever expanding and evolving, and that we can intentionally take part in this. And I know that is exactly what is happening right here in this very moment that we take with us in every moment forward. And so I'm just very grateful for this, to know this, grateful to take this forward with each and every one of us, and grateful to be here in this opportunity, in this moment. And so I simply release this and let it be. And so it is. Hmm. Thank you.